sometimes people will defend uh, their speech, the things they write, in terms of their objectivity or neutrality.
Phil Phails for you.
And they'll say, I'm not being emotional, you're being emotional. I should be able to have this discussion. So there's one way of looking at the case I mentioned. Masha Gerson was due to be awarded a prize in Germany for his, for their forthright speech on certain issues. And because of Masha Gerson has, I don't know their heritage, but I think it involves some Jewish heritage. And in fact, the prize was the Hannah Arendt prize, and Hannah Arendt was a philosopher who wrote about totalitarianism and famously got into a lot of trouble for writing about the trial of the Nazi Adolf Eichmann in a way that upset people, because the prevailing view at the time of the Eichmann trial after the Second World War among many Jews was that the Nazis were monsters and they should be treated as such. And Arendt, in her book Eichmann in Jerusalem, essentially painted Adolf Eichmann as a petty bureaucrat with very little imagination. What was missing in Eichmann was an ability to recognize the inhumanity of what they were doing, according to Arendt, rather than Eichmann being a monster dedicated to the destruction of anyone. So Eichmann, from this point of view, was not what people might have regarded as an ideologue. He was a bureaucrat.
A rubber stamper.
Who didn't think twice about rubber stamping atrocities, for example, in the name of efficiency. Yeah, this was an unpopular view. Okay, fast forward, Masha Gerson was awarded the Hannah Arendt Prize, but because Gerson had spoken about what they considered to be the relationship between the Palestinian situation that we discussed and the situation the Jews had faced, Gerson was labeled by various people anti-Semitic. He's they, as I said, have, I believe, a Jewish heritage. Not that should be determinative either way, but it's merely to say that this is a nuanced question. And Hannah Arendt was also Jewish, by the way. Gerson commented afterwards that Hannah Arendt would not have received the Hannah Arendt Prize in Germany at that time. In fact, Gerson did receive the prize, but it had to be moved to a different location. There was a big furor about it. Here's a different issue where we see the same thing, but now looked at in a different way. So that was an issue where Gerson was unable to make a comparison, or at least did make a comparison, but it was not a popular comparison.
Right.
And
he
might say that there were attempts to silence Gerson based on them having said something that was unpopular with many people. And you might say, well, Gerson was the voice of reason. You might take the view, Gerson was the voice of reason. These other people were just emotional. Okay? Now, I actually do feel something like that. But I want to be really careful. Here's a different case. There's a long history in this country and beyond of scientific racism. So people have done things like measuring skulls and looking at measures of intelligence like IQ and used their analyses to justify racist positions. So the idea has been that certain people need to be treated like children because they're inherently inferior. That's the racist position.
That's that idea that some like Homo erectus and Neanderthalis, it's about that. Like some people have more Neanderthal blood or more.
One variant of it, but it's not closely tied to amounts of Neanderthal blood or genes. There's, as far as I know, no evidence at all that there's any correlation between things we value in humanity and percentage of Neanderthal descent. I've never seen any evidence to that.
Okay.
But that would be just a type of argument that people would make without needing data.
Yeah, if you're more Neanderthal, you're less human than us, Homo erectus. We've got more Homo erectus
the mere
than
fact
you do.
that Neanderthal is an insult when we actually know very little about
Neanderthals
is already
a bit of racism, scientific racism.
Charmingly disturbing, but it's speciesism because they were a different species.
Okay, yeah, speciesism.
So there's a long history of scientific racism. What do we do when someone wants to invite, and this is something that's happened multiple times in the US, someone wants to invite to campus, let's say, a speaker who is has a program of work involving comparisons between IQs of different racial populations. Okay, what do we do about someone who claims, as for example, the kind of public intellectual Steven Pinker has claimed, that we should be mature enough to have these discussions about whether there are any differences in intelligence between people of different races? That's what someone like Steven Pinker would say, and others have said. The trouble is that when you look at the history of scientific racism, what you don't see is a lot of careful work that's led to clear conclusions. What you see is evidence that neither the people doing the work nor the people talking about the work were anything like mature enough to have even-handed conversations about the science they were supposedly doing. On the contrary, it's very clear in study after study that people doing this work have typically had ulterior motives and have ended up with essentially, you might argue at least, confirmation bias. They came in looking to demonstrate a point they wanted to make.
Yeah.
Like slavery was quite reasonable.
Because the IQ of the people from that region is lower than this other IQ, so we should
not looking at
control
factors that are not well understood behind IQ.
Yeah. Well,
diet,
how do you
education.
even define IQ? You think about
Definition
Howard
of
Gardner
IQ is going to be is going to be performed in a way that values certain types of thinking
that we value.
Certain other types of thinking. This is only to say that it's nuanced. Let's leave behind right now the question of when is actually what would be a good type of study and what the particular bugs are or are not in any given study, whether the study was good, that study is bad. I imagine that if you looked, you could say, I definitely know bad studies, and I expect you could find studies that would stand up to more scrutiny.
Right.
The problem is that humanity is not mature enough to have this discussion. What actually happens, as a matter of fact, is that whatever the results of any study,
we look at the results.
People make atrociously simplified claims and run about screaming that these people should or should not be denied this sort of freedom to do this or that. And we find justifications for essentially racist ways of looking at the world. This is not to say that everyone who reads any of this work is a racist or becomes a racist. It's rather to say that it's a matter of fact that the work gets misused and abused, and also that some of the people, at least, perhaps a majority of those who've conducted this type of work, have not had what I would describe as pure motives. I don't know what a pure motive is, but I'm confident they haven't had pure motives. I think, on the contrary, they've had interests in justifying a particular way of thinking. Given, if you accept that there's reason to say that no
Should they be
discussion of
allowed
this
to
issue has,
influence with their speech at UT?
yeah,
That's the
so
question. Yeah.
absolutely. So if you take it that nothing good comes of such discussions, we haven't reached a stage where we're able to look in an interesting way at differences between intelligence of gender or intelligence of race. People find it very scary. If I tell you that at every major American educational institution, women are doing better than men by a tiny amount on average, people find that either scary or a big deal. I told you so. Whatever they feel, they don't feel like, oh, that's an interesting fact. Let's look at what's going on here. What are the different causes of that? Are women working more? Are men? They rather leap to a simplistic story. The simplistic story could be, well, that's because it clearly shows your grading system is all messed up. Like, someone might decide, because I already know that men are the smart ones.
Yeah. We both know that, David.
People think they know things,
Yeah.
right? And the fact is that there are certain things that people cannot have neutral conversations about, and we know it.
Yeah. We can't have neutral conversations
And that
about
makes
some things.
absolutely. And that makes the mere attempt to push, I'm being objective. You can't object to me reporting facts.